In the previous lesson, we had looked at just dealing with that one element and attaching event listeners to that and accessing those single elements by getElementById. But we also need to look at the possibility that maybe we want to access something via class, or we want to access it, or we want to access multiple different elements through different classes, through tags, and so on. And that's where we can use query selector. So I'm going to set up a brand new access, and I'm going to access all of those buttons, and then I'm going to loop through the buttons and update maybe something on each and every single button. So in order to do that, the first thing that I need to do is I need to select out my element. So I'm going to call it button EL for button element, and document, and I'm going to just use query selector, and show you what happens when I use query selector as opposed to query selector all. So with query selector, we can select all the elements with the class of button, and maybe we can console log out that information, or console directory out that information. So it's button EL. And just to show you what's going to be output here within the console, so when I refresh it, we see we only are selecting that first button. And that's what query selector does, is it still isolates only that first available value that contains buttons. So it's going to always access our first one, and we can see that within our dev console here that we're accessing click me. So what if I change this to query selector all? And as we know from before, that we get a list of 4 different, or any one that meets that BTN value. Now we can actually take this even a few steps further, where we can comma separate this out. So if we want to access all the BTN classes, and maybe we even want to access all of the divs. So see what happens here, and we get a node list of 6. We see also important to note that we're not overwriting it, so we're getting the buttons, we're getting the divs separately. So maybe we even want to do something like my image or something like that. So just gonna go out and refresh that, and we see get a node list of 5. So we don't duplicate our lists. So this is definitely a good thing, because we don't want to have multiple elements and then have them several times within our list. So what we can do as well is we can actually loop through this list of elements that we're returning as these button elements. And the way that we can do that is we can use length. So I'm going to just console log out, and I'm going to update this, and we have a value here that contains the length. So we see under node list we have 5, but we also have an object with a value here called length, and we can make use of that and use that within our looping. So now we see that we've got a length of 5, and we can do a quick for loop here. So we're going to equal I to 0, and we're going to look at this as well in more detail upcoming. So for now, we're just going to simply loop out to that dynamic value of the length. So whatever that length is, it doesn't matter, because we're dynamically picking up the length here. So it can be any variation, and this gives us the ability to dynamically loop through every single item that gets returned. And we need to increment I in order to have an incrementing value, so we can actually access and loop through all the different items. So BTN EL, and maybe what we want to do is we want to get that inner HTML. So maybe what we can do is we can console log that out. So we need to bracket out here so that we actually have the next value, and we can loop through them. Console log And let's see what happens here. So we're just going to reload this page. And now we see we get all of that inner HTML from each one of these elements as it loops through them. And I think I should remove out this image because I think that's just going to start confusing things. So see, now we loop through all the different buttons that we have available to us. Just as we added that, got that inner HTML as we loop through all the different items that are available to us, we can also do the same thing where we add event listeners to each and every single one as we're looping through. So maybe we can add click events to them, and we can fire off a function. So maybe we can do the myFun function. So every time either one of them is clicked, we'll just do that myFun function, and we're going to pass through that event information. So see what happens now. So every time it clicks, we get these mouse events firing, and we also get these blue boxes around there. So we can actually pick up and understand what information we've passed here. So even we've got the event information, but we can also get the ID if we want to. So now as we click, we actually get the ID of the element and so on. So this is how you add events to multiple elements, and I've added all these event listeners as you loop through them. And we can simply apply that styling, and we can pretty much do a whole bunch of different functionality here as needed whenever we're interacting with the DOM and looping through once we've selected our elements that we want to work with. So in the next lesson, we're going to dive deeper into picking out these different elements. So we might not necessarily need to have classes and IDs, as we can traverse through and check out all the child nodes and main and so on. So I'm going to show you how to do that in the upcoming lesson.